And we're live. How's everybody doing today? It is a crazy week as usual. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but the last 3 weeks have just been absolutely insane. Things just falling apart one after the other, and it's clearly accelerating. Maybe not the rate at
Well, it's
which
pretty.
wi-
Sorry, go ahead.
not at the rate at which like we'll wake up tomorrow and the boogaloo will begin, but it's very clear that the house of cards that they built is falling apart. It's a kind of thing that's going to take years to finally die, but it's gonna die. There's no doubt about that at all.
Well, and there's a pretty clear reason as to why that is, which, by the way, I didn't introduce myself for this week. Um, what Custer just posted in general. But anyway, yeah. As for what I have going on, yeah, within the next week or so, we're gonna be putting out some more big updates regarding FNet because some big things have. I don't know if Doug has spoken to you about this filthy, and they're sort of like related to FNet, but it's just in regards to subversive technology. Doug has some great ideas which he's thought of incorporating into the project or speculating with on his own, and I think that it's going to essentially change. I love what he's done because I'm not going to say too much because there's not really a whole lot to go on. Like the white paper is not even done yet. It's just they exist in concept at this point in time. But all I'll spoil regarding what's come forward is that it's three major ways, three major industries which the state desperately needs in order to continue perpetuating its further existence. Fuel, the medical industry,
What was that last one you cut out?
education. So schools trying to retain a hegemonic master narrative.
That's not going to be possible anymore. I mean, he hasn't told me about that. Mostly, I'm not going to say what our conversation was about when I was talking with him earlier, but yeah, it wasn't related to. It was only tangentially related to the FNet project. So this is the first I'm hearing about this stuff.
Josh, we don't respond to questions in the middle of the stream. But the reason that the state cares so much about the medical industry is because it's a consistently high demand market. And as a result, that means that if the state were to cartelize it, like people are going to value medicine pretty much no matter what circumstance medicine exists in, and it's also scarce enough that people aren't like it's not like food or water where there's no effective way for the state to cartelize that industry. Um, Scarce enough to where the state actually could establish licensing laws or regulatory capture for certain companies, which would allow them to establish a gigantic amount of the market share by suppressing competition and by making it so expensive to actually enter that market. But essentially, it works in the same way that the state has cartelized the fuel industry, in the sense that will manufacture certain events to expand demand in times where the state needs revenue, or they will do certain things in order to actually generate more revenue for these pharmaceutical companies. And then as a result, they'll generate more revenue through taxation for themselves. And they'll use that to then finance various off the record programs. So that's the importance of the medical industry. Any high demand regardless of relative cost to the individuals is also scarce enough that people couldn't just easily undermine it, like with water or food. The industries which are most important to the state, because those are the ones that the state gains the most from through cartelization.
Pretty much, it's like the perfect example of the problem reaction solution thing. Like medical, as you explained, medical technology and products are always going to be in demand because people don't want to be in pain. They don't want to be diseased. They don't want to be hurt. So
Shit happens. So
absolutely. So the point is that if the government can cause problems in the medical industry, they can then create a panic that gives them more power. I mean, I think most of our audience is aware that in the very early part of the 20th century, $2 a month paid for health insurance and life insurance, which covered everything from checkups to cancer care. Literally everything.
actually, medical insurance didn't even exist until 1925. It came into existence because in 1918, the US government created licensing laws. Which, by the way, licensing laws didn't come into existence because of some sort of consumer demand or because doctors were engaging in low quality service. No, they did that on behalf of the Carnegie Foundation.
Right. And
The
I
foundation.
I was simply using the term medical or health insurance to describe in function what the fraternal societies did.
Right.
It's very inelegant and somewhat imprecise, I grant that, but for people who you're trying to explain this to, most of them are going to have their eyes glaze over when you start mentioning the Carnegie Foundation. So,
Well, when you're saying, oh well, the insurance industry itself didn't even exist.
mhm.
Like we're talking literal pocket change. You could
Yeah.
pay for medicine and getting treated by a doctor prior to 1918.
And of course, what happened is that the government got involved and made everything more expensive because that's what the doctors wanted. They were getting paid too little, and they thought that being catering to workers and miners was beneath the dignity of their profession. These are the actual arguments that they brought forward to the government in order to enact licensing laws. The purpose was literally to make things more expensive. Tell me again that the government works in your interest?
It doesn't.
It
And
doesn't.
yeah, we already mentioned the state's shared interest and how that's sort of a codependent relationship between the pharmaceutical industry and the state. So
Oh god, yeah. Like once the state collapses, all of these stupid monopolies like Mizan's ability to sell life-saving EpiPens for $600, that's not going to be possible anymore.
and speaking of the economy, and this is exactly why things are going so crazy. We can get to the economy.
Oh god, where do we start?
Well, we can start with various European banks, particularly Denmark, operating around literal negative interest rates. That's actually the point we're at now. Banks are giving people money, their investment, so they're operating at a net loss.
Yeah, if you guys aren't aware, in Denmark, banks are paying people to take out loans. There are negative interest rates. If you have your money stored in the banks, you are losing money because that is how well negative interest rates work. And well, I mean, what is this?
Sorry.
I'm blanking on term. Oh God, I can't right
Well,
now.
well, while he's thinking about that, what this means essentially is that there's a surplus of credit that exists. Well, that's the reason why this exists. It's as a result of the central banks and the state essentially just exchanging empty notes back and forth between one another to stimulate the economy, quote unquote. In reality, they're just creating a bunch of debt, which is supposed to represent productivity, but there's no productivity since these are the states and various loaning agencies creating these numbers. So it's completely artificial. It's a house of cards essentially, and I blanked because of that. Stop posting memes in general, goddammit.
Yeah, it's kind of threw me off
But
as
anyway,
well. And of course,
uh,
this
what I was
is
gonna say is that there are a lot of people who will still complain for some reason. There's no confirmation of Austrian business cycle. Well, I'll probably go more in depth, making a video providing proof business cycle and why the Austrian business cycle is the most accurate current theory that exists to explain market trends regarding business cycles. But this is one of the various pieces of evidence which exists that specifically supports the Austrian business cycle and which no other school of economic thought would be able to explain. Just the fact that negative interest rates themselves can exist naturally as a result of time preference and the fact that people don't operate inherently at a material loss, negative interest rates shouldn't exist. The only way that they can exist is from a surplus of credit. And the monetarists sort of like poo-poo with this idea of, oh, credit is bad, but no, central banking in the state, they can just they can make the rates accurate. The problem is though that itself there are these centralized organizations themselves setting these rates. That's just an intrinsic problem. There's no way to get around that. Because if they can just arbitrarily set rates, then that means that there's not any operating in accordance with market trends and human action. So they're going to create rates, not what's generally creating productivity, but what's profitable to themselves individually. And as a result, you're going to get these false market signals, which investors will pool their resources, which encourage investors to pool their resources into certain industries or to not in other industries. Based on a completely skewered sense of the actual supply and demand which exists for these markets. And there's no other school of economic thought which acknowledges that other than the Austrians.
yeah. I mean, I don't really have much else to say on that.
But yeah, there are several countries experiencing just overt bank runs in the third world right now, particularly Ghana
Yeah, you sent.
is one of them, which is, yeah.
I think it's like 1/3 of their entire. What was it? I don't remember what it said. Yeah, here it is. Yeah, a third of their banks have just straight up closed, which of course means
And
that there's probably a lot of credit, or rather debt, that is being held on by other banks that are never going to see those assets again. This, of course, is going to make other banks insolvent. And what makes this even funnier is that in Africa, especially, China has been putting the screws on several countries in order to make them Chinese proxies. So you can be certain that there is a lot of Chinese investment in Ghana, and as a result, well, the Chinese are probably holding a lot of Ghanan debt. Now, granted, there's probably not a lot of Ghanan economic output that would really cause significant damage if all of that debt that China is almost certainly holding on to were to default. But I mean, it shows you that the kind of house of cards that the banking system is currently built upon. That a few bank runs, all it takes is to, cause a huge chunk of the financial industry to simply cease to exist.
Oh yeah, because now, as you mentioned, a lot of this credit and a lot of these assets are never, are essentially defaulted at this point. So to have some significant effects on the banks of other countries, and it's really just going to ripple up onwards from here. I think honestly, this is the beginning of the end. You see a lot of media talking constantly about the recession, and that's because this in part plays into their narrative. Our conclusion, but the fact that there's going to be a recession, like they're going to try and take this to a different conclusion, and this isn't even a prediction or trend based on what I'm seeing, but yeah, they're already writing articles about this, and there already are politicians trying to spin this narrative. But basically, the conclusion they're going to try and make is that Trump's free market policies and deregulation caused the economy to collapse. Exactly what Abbott just wrote,
Yeah,
which I've been warning people about for the last several months now. I've been warning people that's another reason why they should probably try their hardest to establish that Trump is a protectionist. Even if they're Trump supporters, they should start saying, oh, well, Trump, he's not a free marketer, he's engaging in protectionism. Because I foresaw this. I think you could probably go back in in the Backalley, our Discord server, and if you were to go back to like February or March, I was talking with people about this very scenario.
and I mean, I remember doubting you, and you did call it. You were absolutely correct about this.
Yeah, that's exact. It's essentially, I'd understand why you doubt it, because it's very on the nose how much this sort of mirrors the narrative behind the Great Depression,
And the
where
Great
you
Recession.
have Herbert Hoover, and in the Great Recession's case, George W. Bush being painted by the media and the state-run narrative that they're free marketers deregulating everything. I mean, in the case of Bush, he was pretty openly a protectionist in the same vein as Trump, and Herbert Hoover was virtually identical to FDR in pretty much everything that he did. Every
And I
sort of position that he have, and that's exactly what's going to happen here.
and
They're essentially preparing for the economy to collapse sometime within the next year, and they're going to select a Democrat. And this Democrat will be presented as as a radical reform type who will, fix the economy, quote unquote. And given that the economy is, collapsing, and that the U.S. right now is already trying to instigate multiple military conflicts, what'll likely happen is, they'll create some sort of like military economy, or they'll try to. I mean, that won't be able to happen because of encrypted ledgers and decentralized networking. But try to do. That's sort of what they're on course to do right now. And I recognized that just based on the similarity that the narrative being built to the pre-Great Recession narrative and the pre-Great Depression narrative of people warning, oh, there's going to be a depression. It's only the Austrians for the most part warning that there's going to be a recession, and doubt and everyone doubting it. When it happens, it's blamed on the free market. It still kind of is to this day by a lot by mainstream narratives. Both of those are blamed by like they'll present it as rich people having too much money, but the economic argument behind that is that it was a general glut. There's no such thing as a general glut. Say if you were to Keynesians have absolutely no answer to Say's law, and they have absolutely no excuse for that because Say's law was formulated 100 years before Keynes even wrote his general theory. Which, for those of you who don't know what Say's law is, it's essentially that supply and demand are interchangeable, but to be more complicated or to get into how it's technically explained, how it technically functions. Oh shit, my screen just went black. Can you still hear me? Okay,
Yes, we can hear
you
you.
can.
We're good.
I just didn't touch my mouse for like 10 minutes and the screen went black. So, but anyway, um, but essentially, how to explain? Do you have a better explanation of Say's law? I'm really blanking.
Say's law is just population creates economic output.
Productivity creates demand, and demand creates wealth, which then fuels productivity.
hmm But what I was going to say on Hoover is that I was talking with someone a few days ago about how nearly identical Trump is to Hoover. Both got into office on a platform of being businessmen, that we need a businessman in Washington, that he's going to get the government straight, he's going to balance the budget, he's going to just generally be a pro business president. Then
Yeah, that's
he turns
exactly what I noticed.
and then he's going to turn out to be, to nobody's surprise, a massive protectionist who's going to increase the size and power of the economy. And the narrative is, of course, going to portray him as basically a free market anarchist. I still remember
Yeah,
in high school social studies class when we were doing our segment on Herbert Hoover and the Great Depression that one of the vocabulary words they had us learn was voluntarism, in reference to Herbert Hoover's policy of essentially not getting the government involved in the economy at all, and essentially just pleading to businesses to please just hire more people.
yeah, that's something I remember too, and a couple of people have linked like screenshots of their textbook. Their textbooks actually say that Herbert Hoover is a voluntarist.
I've seen it personally when I was in government school, and this was like uh, years ago, like almost a decade ago. I can't remember which year I saw it in. I think I saw it in multiple years. But yeah, that was very much a thing, and you can see very much the rumblings for that today. And I remember seeing this. This also lines up with what I also personally experienced in the 2008 financial crisis. I'm old enough to have that in my living memory, and I had a family member, like my dad, who was actually working in Wall Street, or rather a major financial firm, during the time of the 2008 financial crisis. So I had a pretty good idea of what was happening, why it was happening in real time. And suffice to say, that is also very interesting to see the narratives being built in real time about how this was a failure of bank greed. And if we just had just a few more restrictions on our ability to voluntarily associate and voluntarily trade resources, then this would have never happened. Even though, of
Yeah,
course, that was absolutely ridiculous.
Heartless Soy Boy just linked an example of a textbook, presumably his own textbook, claiming that up until 1992, the government quote, adopted a laissez-faire policy, which allowed John D. Rockefeller and Andrew Carnegie, which, by the way, the Carnegie Foundation and the Rockefeller Foundation both sponsored Roosevelt's antitrust laws. So, but anyway, it allowed them to establish monopolies and exploit their employees.
That is just, it is agony to think about like all of the propaganda that's going on. In my area, Monday, which was just yesterday, was back to school, and my heart just breaks for those kids because I know for an absolute fact they're not only learning nothing of value, but they're going to be lied to and propagandized to. And most of them are probably going to go through their entire lives, even after the state collapses, still earnestly believing that the bullshit that's being spewed at them as though it were fact. It just pisses me off.
Yeah,
I bet.
You mentioned even after the state's gone, right?
Yeah.
Like half listening there, but yeah, I think even that's something which I'm pretty sure we'll see even after the state's gone. People will society or the society which will sort of shape after the state collapsing, like all these statist ideologies will see it as sort of a confirmation of their own views, bizarrely. Like Marxists will claim that a free market anarchy is an example of communism being achieved, and that's an example. But
Yeah. Which I mean,
you ever thought about that?
yeah. I was just what I was thinking about is I was thinking about this the other day, and I can completely imagine that because our praxis does not require people to be ideological anarchists or agorists at all, then literally anyone can do it unknowingly. Then
Not
all
a
that needs to be
problem.
that I think it's going to be we're going to have a situation where a lot of people are still going to go along as though like they would have their preferred model of society arranged through violence. Ultimately, what they think is not terribly important because society will be so decentralized in such a way that a coercive
They tried
monopoly
to
cannot
enforce
possibly form. But I fully expect that
their
there's going to be a lot of
system.
people who are still going to earnestly believe what they were taught in social studies class.
If they tried to enforce their system with violence, they'd get shut down by pretty much everybody else. Um, but yeah, as I was going to say, that's not a problem. That's actually one of the main selling points of agorism. It's the only model of direct action which not only doesn't incur a cost to everyone engaging in it, materially speaking, but actually encourages people of other ideologies and other sort of political allegiances to their psychic profit in favor of gray and black markets because of their own material benefit.
Oh, I never said it was a problem. It's just that it's an observation I had.
An example of how libertarianism appeals to the interests of everybody simultaneously. But yeah, as I was going to say, as we were talking about just economy in general, yeah, I'd say that it is mainstream. Now is the time where I think it would be in the interest of every libertarian to engage in gray and black market networks, uh, create ideas and ways in which you either locally or on the grand scale could establish they're just models of communication which encourage people to associate with one another on a peer-to-peer basis or just generally through gray and black markets, and would make it more secure to do so because we're getting dangerously close to the beginning of where the state in its current function collapses, and where we begin to enter a hollow state society.
Which is
As I
some
should probably make a whole video on. But
yeah,
yeah,
the
what
whole
were you
hollow
gonna say?
state the whole hollow state concept probably deserves its own video, but I'll just say it right now. It sounds absolutely glorious. Anyways, so
Did,
So,
I think I
what were you
lost my
gonna
train
say,
of
Pumpkin?
I was just gonna say, did you guys see what Omen posted? It was basically in reference to what you had read from the previous poster about the textbooks, I thought it was funny because the first paragraph in it says, monopolistic competition exists when a large number of sellers offer similar but slightly different products, and each firm has some control over price.
Oh yeah, I saw that. It's a screenshot from his
Jesus Christ.
textbook.
Yeah.
The concept of monopolistic competition itself is hilarious because that's an oxymoron, actually.
Yeah, I mean, it's not unusual for them to come up with completely contradictory terms. It's unironically, yeah, it's unironically new 1984 style newspeak. And Omen Rose, could you mute yourself? Thank you.
I think it was gay shit like that caused boomers to say that the government was needed to break up monopolies.
Oh, yeah, it's. I've heard that, but I think we've sort of beat this subject into the ground as much as we're going to on stream here.
Oh God! So what do we touch on next? Because there's
a
lot.
Have you guys fucking seen in response to this talk about recession, what some of the boomer conservatives are saying on social media?
I've heard what Trump said.
I can't believe I forgot to mention that. We're not gonna have a recession because all of our consumers are rich. Yeah, what was the other one?
I believe Trump said that there's conspiracy in regards to
the Federal Reserve Chairman was conspiring with the news media to destroy the economy.
I mean, I thought Russiagate was a dumb conspiracy theory.
I mean, yeah, aside from the fact that, Trump and the executive branch of the United States government basically completely have a hegemonic control over everything every media outlet in the US says. But also, that's an argument for why we shouldn't have a fucking Federal Reserve. If they're going along with this whole ideological actors bullshit narrative, yeah, the fact that the entire economy can be fucked up actions of one person, I think that's everyone's assets being completely destroyed and everything being destabilized because one person had a bad day or one person feels that it's in their interests to do so. Making the case for, you're still making the case against the state and central planning. Not central planning, but central banking.
I mean, what's the difference?
Yeah, I mean, really, that's all central banking is. It's central planning with extra steps, if you think about it.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Oh my. Trump says...
What I was... Even the worst one. We got to get to these various fucking tweets that I've seen from some of these boomers, and these are not even slightly the exception. I'm gonna read this off no, this isn't from The Onion. This is something that an actual Trump supporter said. Libertarianism is what created Marxism and socialism. Masters from conservative super PACs should know if you redistribute all the wealth to the top 1% with less government, your ass is asking for socialism and communism.
What the hell?
What the fuck? Excuse me?
Yeah, apparently that does not even know how it works.
No. Someone stream mute him. Don't do that again.
Did it?
Server mute him, yeah. If you do that again, you're banned. But anyway.
Black Spruce immediately put
I thought that he was server muted. But but that's the thing, once they started talking about the recession, you got to see a bunch of conservatives running around saying this. And I remember back in June, when Tucker Carlson first did his segment, Libertarian Deep State, and politicians only, the state only being ineffective because Republicans are subscribing to Austrian econ. I back then I saw this coming, that they were going, that was essentially going to be the narrative they were unironically running with.
And
State is operating around libertarianism and libertarian ideology, which, for those of you who don't know, is fucking stupid, and I don't even really think I should have to explain why that's stupid, but there are some people who apparently don't understand it. I don't know if whether or not they'll be watching this, but the concept of a deep state, concept that there's some sort of shadow government, a political ruling class which is unaccountable. Essentially, it's a way in which they statists could acknowledge that there are figures in government that are unaccountable, or are conspiring against the interests of the general population, without having to admit that these are inherent problems to the state. Like, they don't have to admit that there are problems with the social contract argument, and they don't have to acknowledge the existence of the libertarian class argument. So that's why the deep state is a thing. Or people will propose the idea of a deep state existing. But
Okay, quick announcement. Just to prevent what just happened a moment ago, I server muted everyone, so yeah, you can't just randomly start talking.
Thanks for interrupting me and defeating the purpose. But
for like 5 seconds, bro. Okay, continue.
Go ahead and take your host role away.
Oh.
That was bullshit. I think Filthy owns the server, so I can't do that. But whatever. But what I was going to say though. Oh yeah. Okay. That's not one of those boomer libertarian tweets. Yeah, that's exactly what I was saying was going to happen. Is they're actually going to run with this. Libertarians are trying to sabotage Trump. Boomers libertarian will have a pretty nasty taste in their mouth from this point onwards. And yeah, it seems to have worked to some extent. A setback for sure, but it's not to be, I mean, this is to be expected.
I'm not terribly, it's gonna be interesting for the next few months, if only because it's going to be funny, like how people who might have only heard libertarian being the fringe, suddenly they're now everywhere. There's a massive shadow conspiracy that the libertarians are the Illuminati reptiles.
Check that out. Somebody just posted a screenshot from Fox News of Sean Hannity himself wearing a little CIA badge on his shoulder.
Yep,
like
there it is.
Tucked underneath the American flag, pinned to his jacket.
I mean, someone made the deliberate decision of putting a CIA pin on him. I wonder what the purpose of that is.
That's what I was thinking when I saw it.
I mean, we already know. I mean, every media outlet in the U.S. are taking marching orders from the government, which is a nice transition into our next story. The New York Times is on record admitting that they submit all of their stories to the U.S. government for approval before they're published.
Ostensibly, they do this in order to do fact-checking, making sure that they got the details correct. But anyone who, follows our content, I think you guys know better. They're trying to make sure that all of their stuff complies with official government narratives. And that, they're able to, by publishing this, they're able to get their good boy points.
That's how it works. These media outlets literally will submit anything that's written by any of their contributors or the people who own the outlets themselves. They will submit that to the CIA or some branch of the federal government, usually the State Department. I mean, there's an entire branch of the State Department dedicated to writing master narratives. The Under Secretary of Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs. You can all look that up right now. Yeah, so for those who specifically don't know how it works, they'll send any story they write to the government. The government will look it over, change some of their narratives. If they write something which doesn't conform to the state's interests, the state wants people to think, and then the state will go ahead and send it back to them and give them the okay. Over.
Pretty much. It's I mean, it's pretty much just confirming what we've suspected for a long time, that there is a
Well, I'm. It's not that I didn't know it. It's just it's nice to have them in their own words saying it, because it makes the case much easier to make.
Mhm.
But
I mean-
no, I mean, there's plenty of documented evidence where the government is just explaining, like the Operation Mockingbird papers themselves, or that speech from the Council on Foreign Relations earlier this year, or William Casey, when he was CIA director, the CIA's strategy of trying to create multiple fronts so that they can maintain plausible deniability whenever they construct their media narratives. So they've explained exactly how they do it, is the fact that they're doing it.
Yeah, but it's just, confirmation. I'm sure there's going to be a whole bunch of second stream outlets who are going to say, massive shock, unbelievable.
It's not surprising.
It's really not. I mean, if you've been following this for a long time, but like conservatives and and minarchists are going to be trying to make clickbaity titles about how CNN and the New York Times and stuff is trying to get approval from the government before they post stuff. But yeah, I mean, here we have a legitimate smoking gun. So yeah, we can no longer say that this kind of thing is controversial. It's proven. We have proof. They admitted it. That is a confession.
Alright, so people are really wanting us to mention Hong Kong, and
Yeah.
the story is not even close to being done yet. But sort of like my take on the Jeffrey Epstein story, what's being presented through the media obviously is not the whole story. I have documented proof as well that that's not the whole story this time. I mean, I could prove that Jeffrey Epstein didn't commit suicide. There's plenty of evidence for that, but
Hell, we have the frickin' autopsy report that says that, yeah, this guy had bones in his neck that were broken that can only be broken, well, not only, but are mainly broken by strangulation rather than, hanging. And of course that makes sense because, there's multiple vertebrae on the neck. When you're strangling someone, typically it's going to be on the lower part of your neck versus the upper part of your neck that's closer to your brain. So physically, it makes a lot of sense that they would be able to figure that out and relatively easily, but that didn't stop the medical examiner from putting out a report that says, like, oh yeah, he definitely died because of hanging, even though he had nothing to hang himself with. All of his clothes and all of his sheets would not have been able to support his weight, and I sincerely doubt that there was anything in the room that he could have possibly connected the noose to.
I'm pretty sure I heard someone say that he hung himself with a noose, which was a tissue. I'm not fucking kidding you. Tissue.
What kind of tissue did he have access to?
I don't fucking know.
No. It was that that he was supposedly hanging himself with was his kind of like tissue paper to prevent that exact thing.
But what was it, like Kevlar tissue? Dragon skin tissue? Are they giving?
about Hong Kong is basically, like, yeah, we're making a full video about it once the whole story is played out. But what we know now is, of course, that the Chinese government is essentially instigating a lot of these acts of violence. They're doing things like planting weapons on the protesters and paying members of Chinese street gangs to go in and act like protesters or to start fights with protesters.
They also just straight up have Chinese operatives just go in there, infiltrate, and pretend to be protesters in order to, start crap. It's kind of the
Another
same thing.
thing,
It's kind of the same thing that Democrat Party organizations did during the Trump campaign.
another thing which nobody seems to be talking about, and this is where the story gets interesting, is that a lot of these protest organizations, the organizations managing the protests on the street, are financed by the National Endowment for Democracy, which, for those of you who don't know, is a CIA-backed front group, which is responsible in financing various coups and anti-regime movements, which eventually led to coups throughout around the world. Uh, being the most recent example.
Suffice to say, it looks like both sides are trying to instigate a confrontation in Hong Kong. Now, why the Chinese government would want to do it is because it would give them an excuse to crack down and possibly even take control of the territory in full and in earnest. Keep in mind that the Chinese economy is absolutely bleeding right now, and being able to plunder the relative economic prosperity of Hong Kong would significantly be in their interest. And the United States wants to create a confrontation in order to be able to justify foreign intervention. A war against China would be incredibly profitable for the state, or rather politically profitable, because then they can just crack down on the U.S. economy, institute all sorts of increased taxation, all sorts of economic restrictions, all in the name of national security, of course. It's the same thing they did
And
in World War One, World War Two, to a lesser extent the Vietnam War.
The Chinese government is also a major competitor and threat to the U.S.'s hegemony over the international petrol markets. But the way in which both of them benefit is, because because both of the economies right now are bleeding and need something to significantly stimulate demand for the state to be able to obtain more revenue and create more debt. And nothing does that quite like starting another fucking war, especially a war between two of the world's biggest states.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's much more to say on that.
There isn't.
It's basically being set up to cause a confrontation. And I don't know if this will actually start a hot war, but total wars don't always start overnight. It's a series of continually escalating encounters and skirmishes that eventually goes on to a full-scale war. It's more likely than not that we'll end up having like what Trump used to do with Syria, where there was a missile strike on their territory for absolutely ridiculous reasons because of false flags. And whether or not that'll actually escalate into anything, I can't say. But it definitely looks like that the state has a lot of fingers in the pot in terms of possible future flashpoint events.
It would be majorly beneficial for the U.S. government for it to actually escalate, because what would happen if it did escalate is obviously Russia, and therefore a lot of the smaller states which Russia is a major ally to would get involved. And if that happened, almost certainly all the US allies, so most of Europe, Canada, and quite a few places in South America would get involved.
Basically, it'd be World War III, the universe's biggest boogaloo.
Effectively, yes.
Ooh.
And
I don't know exactly if that's. I don't know if that's going to happen, but considering that seems to be the most beneficial move from the state's perspective, it's probably what
yeah, we already.
that's. At this point, that's just speculation. It may. I'm not trying to say like a. I'm not trying to make like a doomsday theory here, because I don't think the state's going to destroy itself. Obviously,
It won't destroy itself voluntarily, but it's very clear that they perceive a great benefit in order to by instigating the mass slaughter of millions, possibly even billions of people. I mean, it also puts the events previously into perspective that the United States has been very, very antagonistic towards Syria and Iran, both of which are also Russian and Chinese allies.
Mm.
but anyway, so I suppose that there's one last story to wrap up on, and I don't know necessarily if this is which could be linked to the first story we went over, but essentially here's confirmation. Everything about the mainstream economic narrative being proposed, at least by Fox at this point now, is wrong. There are fewer wealthy people around the world. There are more poor people, and despite GDP figures increasing and the market share of nations which are consuming global energy increasing, the confirmation that
I mean,
confirmation which existed wasn't enough. Here's yet another piece of evidence that GDP does not equal productivity. I don't know how many fucking times that has to be said.
all you have to do to disprove that GDP equals productivity is point out that government spending is counted in GDP. Literally, nobody in the entire economy has to exchange money. They can have an income of zero, every single freaking one, and then the government just spends all of the wealth of the economy or all of the wealth of the nation. Have GDP percentage of government spending equal 100%, and that can still go
Right
up.
now, right now, I mean, like the majority, 90% of farms are over $1.5 million in debt. A large amount of the population are going into debt just to pay their rent or to pay their property tax. I just don't know how you can say that people are becoming more wealthy. It's just, if you look at lived reality, that's obviously not true. The narrative for what you consider a prosperous economy is wrong in the case of Keynesians, or what the government's narrative that they're promoting in the media is wrong.
It's an absolute, I think we used this term earlier, house of cards. People just aren't able to afford things anymore. I mean, we've talked about the retail apocalypse before. That last, I think this was months ago, there were like 7,000 retailers that just outright shut their doors. I imagine that number is significantly larger now, but yeah, people don't have the kind of money, liquid assets to be able to spend. So as a result,
Um,
well, you have stuff in order to fight that. Central banks have to do things like what they're doing in Denmark, which we talked about earlier. The only reason that they're able to keep stores open is believed is that people spend. The only way they can get them to spend is by taking out loans, going into the debt, which of course is only going to bury them even further. But as you might imagine, like this is just to stop people from spending. It goes without saying that in the Keynesian model, spending is the absolute worst thing you can possibly do with money.
the Keynesian model, did you mean to say that? Because that's essentially the exact opposite.
Spending or save? Did I say spending? I meant saving.
Yeah, he says spending.
Keynesianism, that's literally their argument for how to maintain a prosperous economy. Just keep spending as much as humanly possible.
I might have misspoken. I meant to say
And
savings
even
is the
more.
worst thing you can do.
Yeah. Spend as much as humanly possible, and even more than what humanly possible in the case of, the extent to which Keynesians take it.
Yeah, it's just anyone should know that savings is just money that's going to be spent more efficiently at some point in the future. But I mean, they'd rather have like what they did in the Great Depression, where they just hire people to dig ditches and then fill them up again. That's production.
Shuffle the shit around and exchange empty notes which are intended to represent something which doesn't exist.
Oh, it's beautiful.
The government is magic, guys.
The government is magical. All hail almighty government.
And remember, guys, if the government's spending lots, you're doing fine.
That's because that's obviously how that works.
Yeah, obviously, because at this point, even collecting revenue for the state costs more than what the state's getting in returns. It's like $1 for every 7 transactions is $2.77 spent.
How much does it cost to print money?
I know.
What was that?
He's asking how much does it cost to print money. I know for certain that pennies
it's more
and
than
nickels,
what they make. It's more than what it's worth.
I know pennies and nickels, the metal for those, is actually more valuable than the coin.
Yeah.
I don't know, but in terms of like the actual dollars, the dollar notes, I don't think so. At least not yet.
Yeah, I think just like if you were to go back a month ago, that sort of was a sign that, there's about to be a big ol' economic boogaloo. The fact that it costs more to obtain revenue through taxes than what the state actually gets in returns. I mean, I can't emphasize how big that, I can't emphasize enough how big that is. That's like, that is, they're literally operating on a loss, just like the banks. XBL Spartan, no one said 8 o'clock. You must have misheard.
I probably
It was
did,
always
but I meant like my time. I probably, yeah. We always have trouble with time zones.
Okay. Well, I've never had any trouble with time zones. I've made it very clear. I live in the hick part of Washington, so it's Pacific. It's always been Pacific.
Whenever I schedule a stream with SO, I always tell him Pacific time. All right. Well, how about this, Spartan? Are you on the thing right now? Oh, yes, you are.
Now he is.
Okay. So you want to close it out. So how about this? We have one last thing.
Hello! Oh, I found it finally.
Yay.
It was
He wasn't here for most of the stream. He doesn't even know what we were talking about.
I mean, that's fine. I was actually going to give him something to talk about.
All right.
Okay, so I'm just going to post it in general so everybody can see. So here's a screenshot from 4chan of someone from the Huffington Post attempting to get a nigger hate thread going. However, they left their email in their ID. So we not only know that it was someone from Huffington Post trying to, start crap, but we know their frickin' names.
That is the most, boomer shit I think I've ever seen.
Wait, what screenshot?
I posted it in general chat on this server.
Next to most recent message.
Yeah.
Now, that's what I call a pro gamer move.
The general chat? Okay.
Yeah, just scroll up a little bit because people keep posting stuff.
Yeah, shit post.
Got a pretty active channel here. I'm proud and irritated.
Congratulations. But yeah, so if you want to close it out, why don't you just give us your thoughts on this, because this is
Laundry baskets.
that I saw that for the first time and I was just, my soul smiled.
I mean, wow, is that Wow. 10-year-old Indian voice. I do not associate with niggers.
Yeah, but there was also that FBI thread which came out. Well, not it was that FBI I don't know what they were calling it, a dossier or something, talking about. It's probably not it, but they were talking about how social networks work on 4chan, and they posted a header screenshot of their report. Yeah, the post right next to the ID, it said "you," so the FBI posting stuff on 4chan, and so this goes back. You and I both have been saying for quite a while that there's a significant amount of evidence that government agents are using 4chan and 8chan and these various messaging boards to radicalize people and to try and entrap them into becoming shooters.
I mean, we already know that they entrap people into becoming shooters. We have evidence of them trying to do that with a 25-year-old autistic guy, and the parents caught him.
Well, that's how we know that's what they're trying to do here, is because they've been exposed to doing it before. And if you actually look at the stuff posted associated with these IDs, it's stuff like this. Can we get a nigger hate thread? Or the war with Russia and stuff like that.
It's
like we know exactly what they want.
Oh yeah, definitely. So yeah, anyways, I think we need to wrap this up. So final thoughts, guys.
Well, oh my god. The Hong
week.
Kong protests. This guy just the heartless soy boy.
Yeah,
wow.
The
Those people were just sitting down trying to enjoy their lunch, and these people just come in and just wail on shit. That's not a protest. You're just destroying property here.
Okay. Well, what I was going to say is, well, that's it for today's stream. If our recent trends are anything to go on, next week's going to be even crazier than this week. How much do you want? Let's start putting some wagers into chat to see how much I'm right. How much do you want to bet I'm right?
I would never bet against that at all.
Me neither.
For a fourth week, a month straight, I'm gonna be right, and I know it. I can't conceive of right now it any crazier, but just when like the stories actually come out, it's going to be very obvious, I'm pretty sure.
Oh, it's going to be crazy. And I'm going to start, what we're going to do is we're going to start the next stream, and we're going to say, yeah, last week was pretty crazy, but oh my goodness, I was not prepared for what was going to happen this week.
My god. If only Sargon could see this stream. He would say we were acting like a bunch of white niggers.
And
I mean, we are a bunch of white niggers, except in my case, I'm a green nigger.
I thought you were going to say freaking. I wish Sargon was watching. Dude, fuck Sargon.
Well, I have a black plumage, but that's for a different story.
Come on now, SO. Remember, YouTube already fucked Sargon. Where's his channel?
Oh, hey, can I jump in real quick?
Sure.
So, Planned Parenthood is trending on Twitter, and apparently, wait, hold on, I have the story. It says, Planned Parenthood pulls out a family planning program over Trump abortion rule.
Huh?
In other words, it pissed off, the really stupid people. You know who we're talking about. The lefties.
We might talk about it next week.
Sure.
Alright. Anyways, good night, everybody. Thank you for stopping by, and we'll see you next week.
Alright, next week.
Bye.
I'll be on time that time.
Bye.
You'll have to probably stay closer in touch with us because, we tend to schedule these things like a week, or not a week, but like hours before it starts. But usually it's like 8 o'clock Central Time, so it'll be 9 o'clock Eastern Standard.
Oh, Central Time.
I'm going to go ahead and eat dinner, so.
Yeah, see ya.
Yeah, I was on
And there he goes.